Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of Corporate Services Committee to order. And I will look to committee members to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. I'm not seeing any. Brings us to the consent items. There are 7 of them. Any items that colleagues would like to pull? Councillor Van Holst.
Thanks. 2.3, 2.5, 2.6.
Any other items? If not, can we have a motion for 2.1, 2.2, 2.4, and 2.7? I'll look to see if there's a mover and a seconder for that. Deputy Mayor Hubert, thank you. A seconder. Councillor Morgan, thank you. Any discussion on those items, colleagues? Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On 2.2, just wanted to thank our staff for bringing this forward to update the council technology policy. Obviously, times and things have changed, so making sure we're getting up to date with that is great. And then I just wanted to comment briefly on item number 2.7, the new entryway signage for city-owned industrial parks. I know one of them which was highlighted, there's a couple of them which are in Ward 14, and just wanted to touch briefly on the fact that I think it's great that our staff are coming forward with some innovative ideas for Innovation Park and some other places. Obviously, we want to be able to showcase these, and frankly, driving by these sites quite often, especially Innovation Park, it is sometimes obviously you see buildings and the companies that we have there, like Dr. Ecker and the Original Cakery, Saditia, as well as obviously the Fraunhofer Center and the Canadian Center for Product Validation through Fanshawe College. Some really incredible things there that we want to be able to show off to people that are coming into the city. So I think having that signage would be tremendous in making sure that we're showing it off in a way that really values what is there.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
In an associated and tangential way, there was an issue, I think, a number of years ago around signage on the 401. I remember our city's great friend, Mitch Barron, had actually pledged, I think, $100,000 towards that. I don't know if we have any further update on that, but I think that was something that, you know, the issue was that people could almost drive by London and not know that we're here. And how do we raise that flag so that they actually get to this? I'm going to tie it into your item here, Mr. Chair, so that they can actually see the industrial parks. So I don't know if staff would have anything further on that. I think Mr. Henderson might have been on that file at that time.
Mr. Henderson, why don't you come up to one of the mics?
I want to take advantage that you're here today, Mark, you know, and just not let you have a, you know, clean pass.
I recall those discussions. We had met with MTO and entered into a contract with them for the 4 interchange improvements. And at that time, the only thing that we were allowed to do through MTO was basically replace the status quo sign. We could do some concrete work to enhance the look of that, but there was no opportunity to significantly increase the exposure.
I just say unfortunate and limiting. I guess we'd be into renting farmers' fields in that corridor and doing something like some other landowners have done to highlight it, and that might even be something worth contemplating.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. I'll just say that the signs are a great idea too. Having visited some of these places on their opening, the entrances are sometimes very modest, and you're not really sure if you're driving down the right road, but a sign like that would make it very obvious, this is the way I want to go. And again, give it a little sizzle. Thank you.
Any other discussion on any of the items in the motion? If not, just from the chair on item 2.4, this is the reserve fund policy. I know this has been underway for a while. I'm glad to see us coming forward with that. I think it's very appropriate, first of all, to have the policy on the books. And I think what it's actually covering in the policy is covering off all the major elements that we need in that kind of policy. I want to thank staff for bringing that forward. Open the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion carries 5-0.
Brings us to item 2.3, the 2017 investment report. It was pulled by Councilor Van Holst. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. So it was very interesting reading this report. And we're, of course, approaching almost $1 billion in our portfolio balance. And it seems to make sense that we're moving towards more medium-term and long-term investments, because that's a lot of one-year investments to have almost almost $500 million in short-term investments would seem to me a little more onerous to deal with. I wanted to ask about the this new investors standard. So there's a new option available to us. I'm not sure if it's a direction I would want to go, but my first question is ask if staff would be considering a joint investment board. Is that something that the City of London might be looking at? Seems like it's a regional leadership sort of opportunity, but then again, maybe that's something we don't want to be involved in. So that's my first question, just about the joint boards.
So through the chair, so one of the key things when they've implemented this regulation is new, and with the thresholds that you need to have a minimum amount to even go forward with that, that does pose a challenge for some of the smaller municipalities. So one of the options about having the joint boards is particularly to address some of the smaller municipalities that might not have on their own enough money to enter into a board of their own. So that was one of the reasons why they put that forward. So I would say, given the City of London's size, if the City of London were to proceed and go forward, we would certainly be looking at it from a City of London perspective. One of the things we're grappling with, and this is as we continue to do our due diligence, is how you start to balance then multiple investment policies potentially with your longer term strategic priorities and all of the different policy elements from cash flow management and your investment board, and how all of those objectives then start to interlink. So when you start to put in other municipalities, it could potentially get even more complicated. So we are actively at the table talking to other municipalities and starting to see. Toronto is still very, very new at this. So we're certainly following their example and looking at what happens to inform our decisions in the future years. And we're going to continue doing our due diligence this year and report back once we have a little bit more information on whether it may be a good thing to look at, because there is a cost benefit decision ultimately we'll need to do.
Okay, thank you very much. The strategy itself, like you said, there's some definitely costs involved in this. And how much time and energy is it going to take? Because looking at this from the start, I don't think I'd be that interested in having you do a lot of work. I'd rather just let somebody else pioneer this. And the downsides seem like they could easily eat up whatever extra returns we got, and they would also put us at greater risk. So that's my concern. So then the question again through the chair, how much work are you planning to put into this?
Through the chairs, we are looking at this. We're not putting a significant investment of time. It's something certainly we're going to follow. I know there is a regional group that is looking at this, and we're hoping to learn from their experience without having a significant investment in time to identify what the key risks and issues are, so that we can bring it forward to likely early next year for a bit of more, with a little bit at a high level analysis of what the costs and benefits are more specifically, to see whether a council would want us to even move forward. So not a significant amount of time.
Okay, and if I may, maybe let me ask a question about the regulation that made me most nervous, where it says if we were to opt in, we must invest the money investments that we do not require immediately. And it seems that we don't have the option of keeping some of them out. They all have to go into this one fund. Would you comment on that for me? Thank you.
Through the chair, one of the key things about trying to do our due diligence is understanding what all of those mean. And I think there is some subject to interpretation of what that could potentially even mean. So those are some of the things that we're trying to understand and talk to other municipalities in terms of what, when they say immediately, exactly what that means and whether it means all or a portion of, because obviously there could be changes over a period of time in the short term that could potentially impact that. So we don't really have a specific interpretation yet. So we are trying to get a better handle on that, and that'll be some of the due diligence we'll do initially.
Okay, thank you. I'll maybe just say congratulations on the growth of our investments and pass this off to my colleagues. Thanks.
Councillor Morgan.
I'm very supportive of the policy. I like the changes and adjustments we're making over time to the balance between short, medium, and long term, as well as the threshold flexibility that's in there for us to basically shift, to make sure that we're not missing opportunities. The thing that I was curious about is maybe less so in the long term, because I think I understand it there, but in the medium term, the balance between internally managed and externally managed, what do we achieve by having that sort of balance? Are we achieving diversity of investment by having an externally managed component of the portfolio? Are we, if we're getting comparable returns, but there's no diversity advantage, then what is the purpose of the balance between the internally managed and externally managed ratio?
Through the chair. So yes, we're able to have diversity in looking at different holdings, but also allows us to balance and tap into expertise. So while we have a bunch help on the long-term position, it also allows us to be able to utilize the efforts and capacity of some of our custodians in diversifying the medium terms.
Yes, so like I said, I certainly understand it from a long-term perspective where you're going to make investments that have a little higher risk and you want expertise associated with that. My question around the medium term was mainly related to all of our internally managed stuff are all GICs, pretty easy to understand and purchase. And the externally managed stuff, I guess, would have a little more diversity than just those GICs is what I was asking. And it sounds to me like that's the case.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
That's all the questions I had.
Any further comments on the 2017 investment? No? One thing I'll say from the chair is I'm really glad to see us shifting from even as recently as 2013, long-term investments only being around 13 or 16%, and then slowly bringing that up to meet the target that we initially had. And then I think the new targets are helpful. I know it's just a few basis points difference between what we're getting on the medium term and what we're getting on the long term, for example, but that adds up a lot over time. And it's important that we have it matched up with the needs we have for capital in the organization. And these kind of small changes really do add up over time and help us maintain the really high credit rating that we've got, having a prudent investment policy, especially now that we're dealing with almost $1 billion in assets. Let's have that moved and seconded. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Van Holst, second, or Councillor Morgan?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
This brings us to item 2.5, the FCM grant funding agreement for corporate asset management plan and policy. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a hooray for the FCM, who's managing a program and has given us the $50,000 grant for our asset management program to go towards that. I see that 44,000 is for the program, and then 5,000 is for public outreach. And I guess my first question is, what kind of public outreach are we going to do on on the asset management program?
Through the chair. So as part of our application to FCM, we promised them through three things. First, a public outreach video, which they really wanted us to educate the public about asset management and what's the impact of our investment going to happen into our future assets. And asset management policy and asset management plan. So the first $5,000 is going to be spent on creating a video similar to the budget basics video that you have seen to educate the public and use it as an outreach tool for asset management.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that would be a good thing. They'll certainly give the public a good deal of confidence in what we're doing then, because it's although maybe not the most interesting thing, it certainly is an extremely valuable thing to do. My question was about the new plan that we have to follow, the new schedule, because of the Ontario regulations. So I think we were already in the process of setting up our asset management plan or advancing that. And then we've got on page 50 of the report, these new deadlines that we're supposed to meet. And I just wanted to know where we were already. So I think we probably got some of the work from future deadlines already done, and just how what we've got fits into this already.
Through the chair, I'll start and then I'll pass it over to Mr. Shahata. So one of the key things that we were working on was a lot of the system implementation to be able to have the capacity to create all of these other things. So we knew that in tandem, the regulation was coming and we were trying to prepare a level of preparedness to have a system to be able to create the capacity to do this in the future. So what we already had in process, a lot of these plans to get started and where we were going to go. What this regulation actually did is it actually puts us ahead a little bit more as we work to get a broader piece to move forward with some higher level timelines and very clear policies. So although the timelines are spread out a little bit, it actually is going to put us about a year ahead in 2019 to have a policy that overwrites the high-level asset management plan to get us going. So I'll throw it over to Khalid to kind of give you the rest of the story.
Okay. So in the city, we started asset management back in the days. The first asset management plan was developed in 2014, and our vision was to update this in a 5-year interval. This regulation is actually giving us more time to implement the plan, but we're going through with our planned approach to update the plan 2018, 2019. That meets the requirement of the regulation for the city-owned assets for phase 1 and phase 2, which is still 3-4 years ahead of us. Right now, we are developing processes to implement asset management on all the service area. We have a new software system that we are implementing asset management with. We started with 2 service areas, which is transportation, parks and rec. And once we finish those, we're going to continue implementing the remaining service areas.
Thank you. And then I guess my last question, before I turn it over to my colleagues, what about our housing, including our social housing stock in the asset management plan? Because that came up in discussion recently at the AGMs for the HTC and the LMCH now. Is that the idea that our housing is also an asset? Will that fit into this program? That's my question through the chair.
So right now, they are not part of the core assets that we have in the asset management plan that we're going to develop in 2018. But by 2023, the regulation asking us to include any asset that we have in our consolidated financial statement. So as part of the work that we're going to be doing is we're going to be working with the Housing Corporation to come up with a plan, whether they're going to be doing it and we are providing them templates, or what's the strategy is going to be developed over the next couple of years.
Any further discussion on this funding agreement with FCM? Okay, Is there a mover for that? Councilor Reynolds, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Let's get that open.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to item 2.6, the Industrial Land Development Strategy Annual Monitoring and Pricing Update for city-owned industrial land. Councilor Reynolds.
Sure. So, again, another thanks to staff for putting this together. It looks like a very good and detailed plan. We definitely know where we're heading. And my question was about the undevelopable lands. So there's quite a number of acres of those, and just wondering what kind of opportunities we have for that in and around our industrial parks. What can be done with that land?
Through the chair, so we have currently over 300 acres of land, some of which is partially serviced and some of which is still undergoing further studies. We are targeting next year for bringing in around at least 35 acres in the Huron Street area at the north of the VMP. And there's a number of associated parcels that we think are almost ready there. We have some other holdings that further design work, archaeological and geotechnical studies are required. So we're ongoing planning and design for that, and we are looking to report back to council in the next year in 2019 about the overall strategy. But having said that, we definitely have a good sizable inventory of future industrial land, and we're working on it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm impressed with what we've got, but again, some of the land is undevelopable. It says in here, for instance, there might be for the Skyway, 172 acres is the gross, and total developable is 130 acres. So it's 42 acres. Can you describe what that line is? It generally a woodlot with creeks flowing through it, or I'm wondering what kind of opportunities we've got for that.
Through the chair, so when we acquire land, we acquire it on a gross basis, and then we go through a planning exercise to define how much of it could be net developable. So what the land that you're seeing that's not developable would be for roads, for the internal road network, for stormwater management facilities, for established woodlot areas, drainage areas, and those types of infrastructure requirements. And so it's the net developable that we're looking for the ultimate yield on.
Thank you very much. That was the clarification I was looking for, so thank you. So the developable is just the stuff that we can sell, right? Thank you.
Councilor Morgan, and then Councilor Zapin, I have you next.
Yes, I have a couple, well, I have one question and a comment. The question relates around the strategy to acquire larger parcels of land over the 50 acres. Is it mainly bringing into play unserviced land, or is it going to be acquisitions down the road?
Through the chair, so that's part of the broader long-term industrial strategy. We are looking at bringing greenfield lands into the inventory. We do have some now, and essentially they are lands within the urban growth boundary. And typically they are designated in the official plan, so they are definitely future industrial development lands. We are in discussions with other owners in targeted areas. This strategy was set by council, and we're following that strategy to look for those locations where we can take advantage of value-added acquisitions to bring in inventory and go through the planning and design process to make them ready, available, and marketable.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to make some comments on this. And when I do, I recall back to 2015, which was one of the first times that I reviewed this report. And I remember doing an interview criticizing our industrial land development strategy. I wasn't criticizing it, but was defending it. In that, when you look at that point in the chart on page 91 and 92 of the package, you can see we were in a period of a dip in what seems to be a cyclical process in land development and sales. And it was only about 21.5 acres that were sold and about 75 jobs that were created, and that's only about 3.48 jobs per acre. And I remember saying, like, this is a good strategy. I'm not sure, you know, why we're in this dip, but it seems like something we should stick with and carry through on. Our staff are managing it well. And sure enough, we've had a very good upward trend in not just the amount of acres sold, but the jobs created from those acres, which now averages about 7.68 in 2017 per acre. So it seems to me like the strategy is working very well, and carrying forward with the strategy is the prudent thing to do, knowing that we will make modifications to the sizes of parcels, and I think it's all been managed very well. So I recognize that we probably will have another cyclical cycle, and it's important to look at our strategy on a very long-term time horizon, which is why I very much appreciate the formatting of this report, which gives us a very long-range perspective on how the strategy is working on average over time. And we happen to be on a very positive upswing, and hopefully we stay there for as long as possible. But again, kudos to our staff for managing this long-term important strategy for industrial land development and frankly, job creation in the City of London.
Councillor Zaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only question was actually asked by Councillor Morgan, specifically relating to the larger parcel sizes and what we're doing to try and acquire some of those for potential future development and sales. One thing though, I know we talked about this a little while ago, but I think it's pretty incredible that we're finally, although I think it's Q3 in this year of Cuddy being finished, which is pretty incredible. So kudos to staff on that. I know we're also close to finishing out with Forest City, only a couple acres left there. And frankly, you know, it's, as I think Councillor Morgan alluded to, we're in a bit of that cyclical up and down as the economy does go sometimes, but right now we're in a good upswing, and I'm really glad to see that our staff are understanding and recognizing the market demand for these parcels of land, and that there's definitely a want to be here in the city in our industrial parks. And given that we're looking at increasing the price of the acres, which is really incredible to see, a little bit more money in the city's pockets and getting more businesses here in the city, which is fantastic. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
I think there's two things that occur to me. One is I'm delighted with, this has been a success. We're almost at the 20-year mark on this strategy, and I think it's been a very successful strategy. And I think it's a real testament to having a long-term perspective on economic development. There's a real tendency in the world of economic development to sort of be reactionary to whatever the you know, the employment figures may be, or the unemployment figures, however you look at it, the participation rate and all those sorts of things. And, you know, everyone says, oh, I'll get more jobs, but this has been a very systematic and consistent strategy towards that. And I have to say, outside of the purview of this is also our brownfield strategy of bringing old sites into new use. I think that's been very successful. And I think one of the symbols of that is the expansion of companies that have come here, have established themselves here, and then say, we're established now, and now we want more land so we can expand, or we want to protect the opportunity for us to expand. And that's sometimes why we don't see activity. They've bought the land. They're not quite there yet, but they want to make sure that they protect the opportunity for expansion in the future. I guess the one question that's, I guess, the critical question on this whole thing is opportunity costs. At what point do we run into a pinch point where Mr. Capel, Lakosha, and his staff at LEDC, or our staff in-house, can't take advantage of the opportunity that happens to be knocking on our door? I am aware in the report on page 94, it does talk about ensuring an adequate supply of land. And to me, I think we're getting to that point where the adequacy, because of the size that organizations want, 35 acres is not a huge, it's not a lot of land, really. You know, and how quickly we can start to ensure that the next generation, if I will, if I could use that term, the next generation of industrial land is available for marketing to opportunities. So, Mr. Chair, a comment and maybe a question to LEDC or to Mr. Warner and his staff, Mr. Henderson. You know, are we missing out on opportunities? Is there an opportunity cost, if I could use that term, a little different than accountants use it, but is there an opportunity cost that's occurring here?
Go ahead.
Through the chair. So, very good points. We have done a lot of pre-planning since our 20-year inauguration of the strategy. So we've, through planning, expanded the urban growth boundary in anticipation of growth in certain areas of the city. A lot of our lands that are readily available are zoned and serviced, as we acknowledged earlier. There are some that are going through the due diligence period. Studies are underway, so they're going to be online in short order. If somebody does come knocking at the door and there is a pinch point, we do have some as-is lands that are not necessarily serviced, but are serviceable. And we should be able to take advantage of the services that may be up the street rather than right to their doorstep. But so they are manageable, and we do anticipate those and are pretty ready to take advantage of it. Capel may want to speak to some of the other interests for smaller size lots, which is really starting to ramp up again.
Sure. Thank you. Through the chair. Just to build on Mark's comments as well, our industrial land development team meets quite regularly, just about every month. And we try to keep a pulse on the demand and supply, as it was outlined earlier. As we're dealing with prospects at an early stage, we're able to discuss internally about our existing inventories and how we need to upscale or downscale the availability for different prospects we might have. So I'd say that mechanism works quite well over the last couple of years. It's proven to be quite successful. We also have a very similar lens on that opportunity cost. So we try to forecast in terms of what our leads pipelines looks like, when we anticipate some of our prospects to make decisions, and we're trying to bring lands on stream accordingly.
Councillor Zafin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies, just one comment I forgot to make before, but you know, one thing which we can look at, and I know Councillor Morgan touched on this, but the employment creation that we're looking at from 2016 and 2017, obviously fairly significant, which is great to see. But these are also expected numbers that we can hope to reach. And one thing which I know we haven't talked too much about at this floor just yet, but kudos to Councillor Helmer as one of the commissioners on the LTC who are working hand in hand with LEDC and some of our industrial partners to make sure that we have better servicing out to those areas, which actually means that we can probably fulfill on a lot of these job potentials. So thanks for that.
Anytime you want to get on the list to throw compliments my way, or I'll move you on. I see Councillor Van Holst and Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, on page 97 of the report, we're talking about the Innovation Park, all phases. Is the lands at the bottom right-hand portion of this map, are those considered serviceable as well? And I guess my other question is, the ones closer to the 401, those are ones that we're charging a premium for because 50% surcharge because they're a little more attractive. If somebody were looking for those ones along the 401 as opposed to something different, would we be able to provide those, or would they have to wait until we work our way towards the highway?
Through the chair, so the lands that you're referring to, the city does actually own in part one of those parcels. We own just over 80 acres in that area. We're in discussions with the other property owners. These lands definitely would command, we feel, a higher surcharge because of the exposure, and we think there will be stronger demand for those parcels. As far as serviceability, there are service opportunities. However, there is still due diligence required. There's further studies that are required for the land's archaeological and whatnot. So they are definitely within the urban growth boundary and designated in the official plan, and they definitely would be of significant interest to the city to pursue development.
Okay, thank you. And since you brought up the archaeological assessments, are we ahead of the game in those? Because I know those can really slow things down, if they come up with something, positive. So perhaps, I could have a comment on that to the chair.
Yep, through the chair, we have done extensive archaeological studies in this vicinity, so we are definitely well ahead of the game in that regard.
Deputy Mayor Hebert.
I want to follow up on Councillor Zafman's and just send a bit of a shout out on the industrial land transportation work that LTC is doing in consultation with the city. You know, the point of having industrial lands is so that not just goods and services can be produced, but people can work. And it's a workforce strategy as much as it's a land strategy. It's about the people. I won't repeat what someone said about that once, but it's about the people, and you fill in the blank. But it is about the people, and if we can't get the people to the industrial land, then it's not about the people anymore. And so after, you know, advocating for that for well over a decade in my day job, I'm absolutely thrilled with the work that LTC is doing in that respect. But and I want to thank publicly LEDC for coming on board and kind of bringing them to the table. But we really need to be having a more robust conversation with the various employers, because it's not a municipal responsibility alone. It's a collaborative responsibility between our transportation partners, not just the public ones, not just LTC. It's not LTC should do this, but how do we get the people? And it's a broader conversation as a community. So I just want to say that because I've been kind of critical of that in the past, that and it's important because it is about the people. It's about getting people to, and we talk about immigration, for example. And, you know, if you're a newcomer here, and even if you can get a job there, it's extremely expensive to buy and operate a car when your insurance rates are like a 16-year-old or 17-year-old male. And so you're dependent on public transit or other forms of transit to get there. So I'm looking forward to that coming forward, because these two things, this is corporate services, it's not community and protected services, but it really do go hand in glove. It's really about the people that work there and the benefit to our broader community. So kudos to the people working on that, and I think it deserves to be highlighted.
Any further discussion, colleagues? Seeing none, I did have a question for our staff, just from the chair. Obviously, it's good news to see this level of sales. I wonder if our staff would be willing to just talk about the interest that people have in London, why they seem to be locating in London, you know, like what we're seeing in terms of the market and what they're looking for, and where we think it's going in the next little while in terms of the short term.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just broadly speaking, all of our industrial lands have different targeted industries in mind. That's how the servicing is designed. That's what the location attributes and other variables contribute to. So lands around the airport have more aerospace-related uses that are targeted, and certainly we are seeing a lot of interest in that industry. Around the 401 lands, there tend to be more advanced manufacturing, automotive, transportation-related industries, and very recently, a lot of food processing industries that are looking around in this region. To build on location, we also have servicing capacities that are designed specifically for different type of industries. So the idea here is not a shotgun approach. It's very targeted. It's very specific to different industry sectors we hope to attract to London, and the ones that create a lot of spin-off activity and indirect economic benefits. As a lot of these companies tend to have head offices in the Toronto area, we do get a lot of inquiries, a lot of interest from that geography. And certainly if you follow around the green belt and stuff like that, there aren't a lot of opportunities for new industrial greenfield opportunities. So that's what's compelling a lot of these companies to look out as far as London.
Thank you. I think it's helpful to get a sense of why people are seeing advantages here in London, and certainly price is going to be one of them, the availability of land, but also that we're having a very tight focus. And I wonder if our staff could just comment on, I know it's addressed in the report, but we did make some changes to the industrial DC grant program. At the time, I know there were some folks who were building industrial buildings who were not very supportive of those changes, but it seems as though, at least at this early stage, it hasn't had any big negative impacts, and that those changes seem to be okay.
I can take a stab at that, Mr. Chair. We have been trudging along with the new policies where the targeted uses are well received because the rebate is 100%. We are getting some pushback from industries that are not targeted, warehousing, logistics in particular, because they feel that there is a direct need, being in proximity to the 401, to have the logistics type operations there. And from an ILDS perspective, I don't think we disagree. We need to let it play out a little bit to see what opportunities we may or may not have lost. At this point, we're just getting people that are inquiring about it, and they need to make a decision based on that. It should not be a showstopper in most cases, but it's hard to say.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's see if there's a mover for that. Councillor Van Holst, seconder. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, colleagues, that brings us to our first scheduled item, item 3.1. This is a tribunal for a development charges complaint for 84 Dennis Avenue. Anyone who has participated in one of these before knows that there's a bit of a formality in terms of sitting as a tribunal and not as a corporate services committee. So I'm just going to consult the order of proceedings and get things underway. So first I'd look for a mover and a seconder to the following motion, which I'm going to have Barb read.
Thank you. The motion is that the Corporate Services Committee now convene as a tribunal under Section 27 of Part 4 of Bylaw CP 1496-244 to hear a complaint under Section 20 of the Development Charges Act 1997 and to provide the complainant an opportunity to make representations.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Let's have that up on the screen.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, this is a hearing of a complaint made by Janice and Patrick Greenside under Part 4 of Bylaw CP-1496-244 as amended at the Development Charges Bylaw in respect of the development charge imposed by the Corporation of the City of London in connection with the development on the land known as 84 Dennis Avenue. I just look to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I wonder who is representing the complainant and who is representing civic administration. I see Mr. Kirkness. I imagine you're representing the complainant and representing civic administration. Mr. Kokoros, okay. I would advise members of the Corporate Services Committee that we do have a lawyer here from the City Solicitor's Office who's here to answer any legal questions that the committee members may have, and I think it's Ms. Anderson. The hearing will be conducted as follows. First, certain documents will be identified for the record. Then the Corporate Services Committee will hear any oral evidence, receive any further documents, and hear any submissions on the matter in public. The order of the proceedings is the complainant first, then Civic Administration second, and then the complainant responding to any new issue that's raised by Civic Administration. No party to the hearing may cross-examine or question the other party on either any written document or oral evidence. The City Clerk, Ms. Westlake Power, acting as Registrar for the Corporate Services Committee, will keep a written record of the hearing. The Corporate Services Committee may decide by resolution to go in camera into closed session to receive any legal advice. Neither the complainant nor Civic Administration, except the City Clerk acting as Registrar, maybe in the hearing room if we decide to receive legal advice in closed session. If the Corporate Services Committee goes in camera to receive legal advice, it will reconvene in public to deliberate the merits of the complaint and make its recommendation. After hearing the evidence and the submissions, the Corporate Services Committee will either adjourn the hearing or make a recommendation with reasons to Municipal Council on the merits of the complaint. And Municipal Council will make a final decision on the complaint under Section 33 of the bylaw. That is, we may either dismiss the complaint or rectify any incorrect determination or error that was the subject of the complaint. So I just asked the clerk to identify and mark the following documents for the record. The first part is the notice of hearing as Exhibit 1, the written complaint as Exhibit 2, the report of civic administration responding to the written complaint as Exhibit 3. Now I'd like to ask the representative for the complainant, Mr. Kirkness, to come forward and identify the written documents that the complainant is relying upon in addition to Exhibit 2, the written complaint, and to provide copies of those additional documents to the Corporate Services Committee, which shall then be entered by the clerk into the record and numbered as exhibits. Do you have any additional documents?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have a PowerPoint
You're gonna need to use your mic, sorry.
Sorry. Mr. Chairman, my name is LeBurn Kirkness of Kirkness Consulting, representing Patrick and Janice Greenside. And we do have one document to submit, which is this PowerPoint presentation.
Do you have copies of that?
I have one copy.
Do we need to have copies distributed to everybody? I'm not asking you, sorry, I'm asking the clerk.
I'll run up and get some copies of
Okay, just hold for a second, we'll just get copies made so everyone's got a copy and we do everything according to the proceedings.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe all members of Corporate Services Committee now have a copy of the written documents that the representative for the complainant is relying on. Those have been numbered by the clerk as Exhibit 4. Mr. Kirkness, why don't you go ahead and make your oral submission? Just using your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members and Laverne Kirkness, and I should be very aware to turn this microphone on because when I'm up in the gallery, I sure have a hard time hearing people, even with the microphone on. But anyway, I want to introduce to you Patrick and Janice Greenside, who have been in this city for decades and raised a family. If they would just stand so you could see who they are. They're in the middle of building their home at 84 Dennis now. They have the building permit. And it's been a long road. And I've been helping them with the last 2 years because this is infill development, so they had to go through site plan approval. And with site plan approval, they had to do neighborhood character, land use compatibility studies, and some other things. So much more than you did back in 2000. In any case, they're here, and we're pleased to. We're not pleased to be here, but we're very thankful, basically, to be able to be here. We understand the importance of development charges and the bylaw, and we're just very thankful that it has an appeal clause, a clause to allow us to come to you to show us our individual set of circumstances that we think is pretty unique and perhaps deserves a higher level of attention than maybe what the bylaw could foresee when it was being prepared. So, the short history is, this is a map that shows Dennis Avenue, and the yellow square is the 84 Dennis Avenue property. The Ralph Hamlin Park, of course, is to the east and to the south. You can see the Southland Sewage Treatment Plant located there originally. It's now a pumping station, as you know. But it kind of gives you a location. We're down in Lambeth. We're in suburban Lambeth. And the Greensides purchased the property back in 1994, which included the home to the west, which was known as 82. And the property now we're talking about is 84, but that's because it's been recently readdressed. The lot in 1994 had a restrictive covenant on it that was placed there by the township. It was because it's too close to the treatment plant. It's within 78 meters as opposed to the MOE guideline, which was 100 meters. But they purchased the property anyway. This is what it looks like. It has 70 feet frontage. And it has 135 feet plus depth for an area of 0.22 acres, typical of lots in Lambeth Estates, large estate type lots almost. And 84 Dennis Avenue is shown in this Google ortho, and at the bottom is a slide of the 82 Dennis Avenue, a home which the Greensides lived in for a period of time. So, between 1994, when they bought it, and 1997, the Greensides were in pursuit of a building permit for a single detached residence. They went to MOE. The MOE said, we're not hard on the 100-meter guideline. We think we can work with you to resolve the difference of 22 meters if you put a warning clause on title. The Greensides retained a lawyer to assist who proposed to the city a servicing agreement of where the clause could be put into. And this would be, of course, having to be agreed to by MOE, which they were prepared to do. So this is a pretty critical document. We're not expecting you to read that slide, but it's of December 16th, 1997. The following 3 slides kind of break it down. It said, notwithstanding the recommendation of the Commissioner of Environmental Services and the city engineer, the restrictive covenant on lands owned by the Greensides adjacent to the treatment plant be removed, subject to the following, which were 5 conditions. So the staff did not bring recommendations in favor of removing the restrictive covenant, but the Greensides were able to put up enough of an argument that convinced council to direct staff to do this. 2 of the conditions were these: a subdivision agreement be prepared and registered on title at the owner's expense, an environmental warning be registered on title at the owner's expense to provide notice to subsequent purchase that occasional sound or odor nuisances may occur. The green sides were able to comply with this, but city staff did not complete either of these conditions. The other third, fourth, and fifth condition, these are two of them. A survey plan was to be prepared. The green sides did that. A construction of curb, gutter, and asphalt, prevailing local standards, was to be done. The green sides did that between 98 and 2000. The fifth condition was to pay a development charge. All of that is what's out of the resolution, but what's most important is that had they been able to get a permit in 1998, they would have paid $5,821. And if they were able to get a permit in 2000, the year 2000, they would have paid $8,111. The green sides costs up to that point were surveying for 36, services and roadworks 3,000. The legal fees were about 20, so they've spent mostly 25,000. Still no building permit. Property taxes also were being paid to date, amount to about 11,500. The green sides in good faith completed their two conditions and were prepared to pay those development charges. But of the 5 conditions, the 2 that were the responsibility of the city staff were not completed, which prevented the issuance of a building permit. They couldn't get a building permit. They couldn't get the restrictive covenant lifted. The green sides gave up. They didn't care to, I mean, the next step was probably to go to court. And what the green sides have advised me is that they just did not have any money to do that. They kind of sat tight. They wondered why development was permitted elsewhere in the city within closer than 100 meters to sewage treatment plants with warning clauses. And also MOE was prepared to agree to a warning clause. So it seemed like the stage was set. It's just that the staff did not bring forth the warning clause or the servicing agreement and refused to. So the green sides now, 2000 through 2016, kind of sat still and monitored the situation. They found out in 2014 that the treatment plant was going to be no more, that it was going to be converted to a pumping station. And that got rid of those conditions A and B. No need for a servicing agreement, no need for a warning clause for a pumping station. So they were able then to kind of, and that's when they came to me, to say, can we go ahead and accomplish then the aim of getting a building permit. So we set out on that track. We made application for site plan approval. As part of the conditions of site plan approval, with infill policies in the official plan, the staff asked for a neighborhood character study, a land use compatibility report, servicing connections, of course, and they made an application for a building permit. Now they're up to about $50,000 of expense. The staff report is asking for $30,000, which is the current development charge. So we're kind of at least $22,000 apart. The green sides are not coming to you saying they don't owe you anything. They just feel that they were prepared to get a permit. They were doing all that they could in their power to get a permit in the year 1998 and 2000. It was because of the inaction of the staff or the refusal to do so that they couldn't get it. And that is where we think the committee could provide some consideration to look after the development charge for something in the order of $8,000 or $5,000, as opposed to $30,000 when they've accumulated all these expenses in addition. That's our portrayal of what would be fair. The 81-1 or the 58-21, they're prepared to pay that depending on how sympathetic this committee may rule. But at least you know that they're not trying to get out of anything. And they are building their home. Of course, the procedure is to, when you get a building permit, pay the development charge and then appeal it. And that's where we are today. So we're hoping that the committee would see it, see their perspective and see the fairness in it and rule accordingly. I'd be glad to answer any questions. Try to. answer
Okay,
any
at the
questions.
end, that's the end of your submission, Mr. Kirknis? Thank you. Now, Corporate Services Committee members and members only may ask questions of the complainant. So just look to members of the committee to see if you have any questions. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
So, Mr. Kirknis, to sort of cut to the chase here, your clients are not really debating whether they're subject to development charges. They're only debating the rate that is applied to their property. Okay, that's my only question.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. It was suggested that the city didn't fail to or refuse to provide the two conditions. Do you have any information on why that might have been the case?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm trying to think of the information that I may have. I don't have any information other than that they just did not care to. And reading over some of the old correspondence, it was the city engineer said, I'm just going to rely on my original position, which was not to entertain the servicing agreement or the warning clause. In other words, the refusal of a building permit.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kirknis, for the presentation. I just have two questions. And do you feel that under the current development charges bylaw, do you feel that there was that the amount was determined incorrectly, or that there was an error in the application of the bylaw?
Both. I think we feel that the application and the amount, I mean, it just does not add up within the context of what we perceive to be fair, given that we were ready 18 years ago and the city was not.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to ask. Sorry. I'm going to ask the representative for Civic Administration, Mr. Kokoros, to kind of identify any written documents you're relying on in addition to Exhibit 3, the report, and to provide copies of those documents if there are any to the members of the Corporate Services Committee. Are there any additional documents? Yeah. Okay, I see we have another presentation here. So we're going to have that circulated. It's been marked as Exhibit 5. And then once all the members of the committee have the documents, Mr. Kokoros, you can begin providing your oral evidence. It looks like everyone has a copy of Exhibit 5, so Mr. Kokoros, when you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in terms of some background information first, a building permit application was submitted for the construction of a new single detached dwelling on a vacant lot at 84 Dennis Avenue. The application was submitted on May 22nd, 2018, and the building permit was issued on June 7th. At the time of permit pickup, building division staff were advised that the owner wishes to protest the payment of development charges, and at that time provided supporting documentation. The owner has indicated that the development charge of $30,435 is not warranted. The current DC bylaw, CP 1496-244, provides no exemption or exception from full DC payment for the construction of a new single detached dwelling, and the DC charges were assessed in accordance with the provisions of this current bylaw. With respect to the documentation provided to the building division supporting the owner's claim that the DCs were not warranted, on June 7th, there was a letter submitted by Janice and Patrick Greenside, and that letter stated 5 reasons. The first reason referred to a letter from their solicitor with an opinion related to council's decision from 1997. The second reason quoted a 1997 development charge amount for a commercial property. The third reason was in relation to an August 1997 letter sent by the City of London's Water and Sewer Engineering Department. The fourth reason referred to a claim that the owners have paid costs for curbing, storm, sanitary, and water services to the property line. And lastly, the fifth reason made reference to property taxes that were paid on the property for the past 24 years. Now, with respect to the DC bylaw under section 28 and what constitutes grounds of complaint, the bylaw states 3 of those that must be valid. First is the amount of the development charge, was it incorrectly determined? B, whether a credit is available to be used against the development charge, or the amount of the credit or the service with respect to which the credit was given was incorrectly determined. Or C, was there an error in the application of this bylaw? It should be noted that while none of the reasons provided in the complaint letter made reference to the above 3 grounds of complaint, a subsequent email was sent to the clerk's office stating that A and C were the grounds of complaint, but no further details were provided as to how the amount was incorrectly determined or what type of error was made in the application of this DC bylaw. So we need to first look at whether DC charges are even payable. Section 4 of the DC bylaw, owner to pay development charges, states, the owner of any land in the City of London who develops or redevelops the land or any building or structure thereon shall, at the time mentioned in Section 6, pay development charges to the corporation calculated in accordance with the applicable rate or rates in Schedule 1 as described in Section 8. The next thing to look at is what constitutes development, and is the construction of a new dwelling unit considered as development? Well, the bylaw states development means the construction, erection, or placing of one or more buildings or structures on land, or the making of an addition or alteration to a building or structure that has the effect of changing the size or usability thereof, and includes all enlargement of existing development, which creates new dwelling units or additional non-residential space, and includes work that requires a change of use building permit as per section C1314 of the Ontario Building Code, and redevelopment has a corresponding meaning. So the construction of a new single detached dwelling is indeed development, and DC charges are therefore due. One of the valid grounds of complaint refers to whether the DC amount was incorrectly determined. Staff has determined the DC amount to be $30,435. And as per the current DC charge rates in the table depicted, that is indeed the correct amount. The complainant has indicated that the DC charges were not warranted. The DC bylaw provides for exemptions and exceptions in Part 5. So the following conditions have to be met in order for these exemptions to be valid. And these exemptions apply to the city and school boards, certain developments such as dwelling unit additions to existing dwelling units, parking structures, non-residential farm buildings, buildings for seasonal use only with no municipal infrastructure, temporary garden suites, air-supported structures operated by non-for-profit use only, some industrial use exceptions, water service charges, sewer rates, and there's a provision there for avoiding duplication of DC charges, and development outside the urban growth area, where city services component is paid only. Part 5 does not list the construction of a new single detached dwelling unit, and it would therefore not be exempt. So continuing on, we can look at a detailed analysis of each of the reasons given, stating that DC charges are not warranted. So the first one was a reference to a letter from the owner's solicitor with an opinion related to council's decision from 1997. The letter summarized an in-camera audience with the planning committee on November 9th, 1998. It provided direction with respect to a strategy to gain council support. And the letter itself refers to a connection charge and not a development charge. As stated earlier, there is no provision in the exemptions and exceptions part of the DC bylaw to waive DC charges based on the above reason. The second reason provided makes reference to a 1997 development charge amount for a commercial property in the vicinity. This is under a different DC bylaw and not the current one. A comparison was also provided between the DC amount for a specific commercial development against the residential DC amounts that were in place at that time. Again, there is no provision in the current DC bylaw to waive DC charges based on this reason. The third reason given is in connection with a 1997 letter sent by the City of London's Water and Sewer Engineering Department. The letter referred to a city-initiated class environmental assessment to explore the possibility of expanding the Southland sewage treatment plant. Its purpose was to determine any interest of existing residents in terms of purchasing sanitary servicing. And it also quoted costs, but these were not related to development charges. Again, there's no provision in the current DC bylaw to waive DC charges based on this reason. The fourth reason stated that the owners paid for curbing, storm, sanitary, and water services to the property line. To date, evidence has not been produced with the submission of the complaint letter. With respect to the existing water, storm, and sanitary sewers along Dennis Avenue, I'd like to tell you that the water main was installed in 1961, the storm sewer in 1958, and the sanitary sewer in 1999. The costs paid to install any lateral piping to the property line are not considered development charges. There is no provision in the current DC bylaw to waive DC charges based on this reason as well. The complaint letter also refers to the fact that the property taxes have been paid for the past 24 years. Water and sewer costs are not funded through taxes, but rather separately through water and sewer rates. The vacant property has not been connected to the water and sewer system, and no financial contribution has been made to the water or sewer system. Once again, there's no provision in the current DC bylaw to waive DC charges based on this reason. And to conclude, Mr. Chair, the construction of a new single detached dwelling, as we've seen before, is considered development. The DC amount of $30,435, pardon me, was correctly determined and was payable at the time of building permit issuance. The complaint letter does not provide valid grounds of complaint per section 28 of the bylaw. However, considering the email that was sent to the clerk's office, it is staff's opinion that the amount of the development charge was not incorrectly determined and there was no error made in the application of the bylaw. Staff therefore respectfully requests that the complaint submitted be dismissed. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair, and I'd be happy to answer any questions later on.
Okay, again, I'll look to members of the Corporate Services Committee for any questions. Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions. One, in the intervening, let's call it 16, 17 years, did the application for building permit remain open? My first question.
Through the chair, the building division has no record of a building permit application for 84 Dennis Avenue.
Hence, there was no, so the amounts Mr. Kirkness or the applicant are quoting the, let's just go with the 8,000. There was no sense that a payable on behalf of the project was created at that time, or a receivable from the city was created in terms of, you know, that we had an expectation of a certain amount, and that was acting as a bill that would be due upon the issuance of a building permit back in 1999 or 2000.
So through the chair, I'm not sure if I understand the question, but what I can say is that applying the current DC bylaw is what we've done as soon as we received the building permit application in May of this year. There's no retroactive in terms of other rates from 2000 or other years.
Yeah, I'm looking at more from an accounting perspective where if there's an ongoing project and there's if you will, an invoice that's expected to be amount due upon receipt of a building permit, did we create the expectation? And I guess if you have no record of an active permit, then there's no ability, even under that bylaw, for there to be a receivable created, even if it's a notional receivable created by the city or a notional payable created by the applicant. I'm thinking strictly from an accounting perspective. So I'm sorry to go over to that side of the world to the treasurer. So you have no record of a permit or a permit application. Okay. And so then how is it, Mr. Kokoris, that the applicant would say that these were these two conditions, outstanding conditions in terms of the site?
The outstanding two conditions are as a result of a council resolution made in 1997. The building division doesn't necessarily get bound by those conditions. So what we would look at is, again, when was a building permit application made? And from there on, the DC bylaw is administered. There's no carryover per se.
Okay, so that raises just one other final question. Is a council resolution, at what point does it become mute?
So one thing I'm going to just say at this point is, this is the evidence from Mr. Kokoros. We also have the opportunity to go in closed session to get legal advice. And okay.
Mr. Kokoris is not comfortable answering that question. That's fine. I'll just leave it as a pregnant question.
Yes, I'm not comfortable answering that question, but I do want to state, though, that one of those conditions spoke to development charges at the time of permit application. So that's something we have to keep in mind.
Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, I've determined that my question is more appropriate for tribunal's legal support, so I'll wait until the appropriate time to ask that.
Any other questions for the representative of Civic Administration? I've got Councillor Van Holst and then Councillor Zafman.
Thank you. So my first question is about the property taxes paid over the last 24 years. At what point did we split off the water and the sewer system from the taxes? Was that before the 24 years or afterwards?
Through the chair, that's not a question that I'm able to answer. Not technically related to the development charge bylaw and its application, but I wonder if maybe there might be some staff here that might be able to help out.
Through the chair, so my understanding is that the water and sewer rates actually are from the former Public Utilities Commissions. They actually predate annexation and the associated changes that occurred at that time, so it was well before the 1997 timing that's been provided.
Okay, thank you. And my question, similar to one I asked the applicants or the complainants, there was two things that they needed from the city in order to go ahead with their application. I guess we needed the warning clause, and we needed to connect them to the sewer, and that wasn't done. Can you tell me why that wasn't or wouldn't have been done or wasn't agreed to?
Through the chair, I have no knowledge of why that was not done.
Okay, I have quite a few more questions, but I don't think they're ones that I could get in. That asking our staff or Mr. Kokoris, they're not questions for Mr. Kokoris, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question I have is more just for clarity. Just in reading the report beforehand and just going over it and in reference to the new presentation provided by staff. In the report, it cites the city, during 1997, city staff provided a development charge amount for residential properties of 5821 more or less. And then in the presentation here, it cites that the charge amount was referencing a commercial property. So I'm just wanting some clarity on how that came to be. Just from the report, it cites residential, and then here it cites commercial. And looking for some clarity on what we were actually looking at as a charge, if that is actually accurate.
So through the chair, I can only presume that one of the reasons given for development charges for commercial property, and if I'm not mistaken, it was a coffee establishment in the area, was to simply show a comparison as to why that establishment paid an amount that was considered low by the complainant and compared it to the residential rates. And there was a reason for that. There was an existing building on the property that was demolished, and there were demolition credits given.
Through the chair, thank you for that information and clarity. And then just to follow up, do we have any record evidence of what the rates were being charged for residential properties at that time? Is it, I guess it's significantly higher than that, or is it close?
Back in 2000, a single detached dwelling would have approximately $8,077 development charges.
Any other questions for the representative of Civic Administration? No. Thanks very much, Mr. Kokoros. At this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Kirkness, the representative for the complainant, to provide any oral evidence, if any, and to make any submissions in reply to any new issues only, that were raised by the submissions and made by the representative of Civic Administration. Mr. Kirkness, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I did have two pieces of information here that Mr. Pat Greenside's digging through his files to, and maybe I should submit these, but in September 21st, year 2000, I have a cover letter to the, or I have a letter from the city, from the mayor, and it was acknowledging receipt of a package and your request to have the subdivision agreement prepared and registered. And there was a check for $1,000 to help cover this, the costs as was required. And the mayor pointed out at the time, September 21, year 2000, these issues of registration are not handled by members of City Council, and therefore I will be forwarding the entire package to John, Commissioner of Environmental Services and the city engineer. So there was a material attempt to get things going backed with a check of $1,000. There's another letter here of September 18, 2000, which is from to the mayor from the Greensides, and it was pointing out that the warning clause could be put in different documents that municipalities handle. And I'm quoting from page 2, and I will submit these to you if you wish. These alternatives options include, but are not limited to, the registration of a warning clause in a subdivision agreement, a development agreement, a servicing agreement, a site plan agreement, and even Section 118 of the Planning Act also avails the chief building official of the municipality to register a warning clause on title to the lands where owners have elected to build next to a sewage treatment plant. So again, Mr. Greenside, through the advice of his lawyer, was trying to help the city put this warning clause in a vehicle that is quite acknowledged through municipal practice, one of those agreements, or just have the warning clause registered on title. You were kind of, I think those go to two things. One question of me is what did happen, how did the city respond? That's what I've got, is the mayor passing it off. Now, I understand the $1,000 was returned to Mr. Greenside, so he is not out the $1,000, but it was kind of a material indication that nothing was going to happen, and that's where the lawyer in 2000 said, I can do nothing more with you dealing with the city in the way that we've been doing. So that's when the green side stopped and waited until 2014. Those are the two submissions. I'd be glad to hand these to you if you wish. I don't have.
I'm just going to confer with the clerk about whether we can accept any written evidence at this point. We did ask for written evidence at the beginning of the hearing, and I think we can only take oral evidence here. I'm just going to confer with the clerk. Okay, thank you. We're going to get copies made, and we will continue the discussion about whether we can accept the written evidence or not once we've got those copies. At this point, committee members, I'm going to ask and see if there's any need to go into closed session to receive legal advice based on the discussion earlier. I think there probably is, but.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We need to pass a resolution to go in camera, so I'll look to see if there's a mover, and Councillor Van Holst, is there a seconder? Councillor Zaidman? Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just curiosity, I'm not entirely sure of the processes around the tribunal. Is there a opportunity now for questions on that oral submission, or simply that was a reply and that's it?
There's no opportunity for questions. Okay, we have a motion, a resolution to go into closed session that's been moved and seconded. So I'll call the vote on that. Yeah. Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. So we are going to leave and go into a committee room. I think it's 3.
Yes.
Committee room 3. Our legal counsel and the city clerk only will be joining us in committee room 3. Thank you. We're back here as the tribunal hearing the complaint about 84 Dennis Ave. I just wanted to say we did have a little discussion in between public session and closed session about whether to accept the written materials that were provided by the representative of the complainant. My decision is that since we basically heard orally what is in the documents written, I think we might as well accept them. That's not normally how things would be done. It would be accepted at the beginning, but I think really it's the same thing, and we should just accept them as exhibits 6 and 7, since there are two different documents. And if members would like to wait to have those distributed before we proceed, I'm happy to do that. Okay, I see some people nodding and some people shaking heads, so let's have a sense of, do you want to wait to have those documents copied and circulated? I think they're sitting right here. We have one of them sitting there. The other one is a letter that looks like it's not as long. Yeah, so we have the copies here, so I can just circulate them. Okay, committee members, everyone has a copy of exhibits 6 and 7 now. I'll just provide you with time to go over that. Councillor Van Holst, are you ready to proceed? Okay, so we're back in public session, meeting as a tribunal. At this point, we have two options. One is to pass a motion to adjourn the hearing to a fixed date and time, where we could seek more information, if that was the will of the tribunal. Issues that were either factual or legal. Or we can pass a motion to adopt a recommendation to municipal council on the merits of the complaint with reasons. So those are the options before us, and I would look to committee, a tribunal for a motion. Councillor Zaven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think looking at my colleagues across here, a little bit of trepidation before moving ahead, but frankly, I think from my perspective, given everything that's been provided to us from both the applicant and from city staff, there are not really, in my opinion, enough compelling reasons to make any exemption to the development charges being charged, and so I would move that we dismiss.
Is there a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Hubert. Okay, discussion on the motion. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, and I know that it's important for the tribunal to articulate their reasons for this. I can only give my own reasons for supporting the motion that was given. I'm not sure if reasons need to be worked into the actual motion. I will say my challenge with this is that I think civic administration has made a case that irrespective of the request for compassion on this case, that there is really no provisions within our current bylaw, which is what they are obligated to apply to this situation for the exemptions that are being requested. And even the exemptions in the bylaw were gone through point by point by civic administration, and I think in a very clear way that outlined that there was no case there for those particular exemptions. Where I did give some deference to is previous decisions of council, which I see as important and carrying weight. However, when I review the material that was provided to us, the previous decision of council is not necessarily related to the payment of development charges, but the removal of the covenant, and the conditions in the letter that is contained are conditions of removing that particular covenant and not related to some sort of discussion on development charges. Although point E does recognize that at the time that a building permit would be submitted, that the fees at that time would be payable, but only as it's related to the removal of, as a condition of the removal of the covenant, which may or may not apply, but that's almost a separate matter in this case. So for me, I don't even see in that council resolution any sort of avenue for other decision-making unless there was some sort of previous building permit that was submitted at some other time in history and development charges could have been charged at that particular point. But our civic administration has clearly said that is not the case, that they are assessing it based on the development, the building permit application that was submitted under the current DC bylaw. So I'll be supporting the resolution for those reasons.
Further discussion? Deputy Mayor Hubert.
In terms of reasons, and I would almost say what he said, but I'll just add the other thing, sort of to reinforce that there was no building permit on record, and as such, there was no receivable created at that time for the amount. So that goes further to it, and Mr. Kirkness, on behalf of the applicant, fully recognizes that DCs would be applicable here. He's not arguing that DCs should or should not apply. It's just simply the amount, and that's and so I would concur with Councillor Morgan's other rationales.
Other discussion? Councillor Reynolds.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so in the limited authority of our tribunal puts us in a position where dismissing the case or dismissing the complaint seems to be the most appropriate action. I am sympathetic to the complainant's situation, and 16 years is a long time to wait to build a house. it's unfortunate that those other issues weren't able to be cleared up at a previous time, but I don't see us having the ability to deal with that situation here.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carries. So the recommendation from Corporate Services Committee is that the complaint be dismissed because there was the decision of the the recommendation from the tribunal is that the complaint be dismissed because the amount of the development charge was not incorrectly determined and there is no error in application of the bylaw. At this point, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn as the Administrative Tribunal and reconvene as Corporate Services Committee in open session, moved by Councillor Zafman, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. All those in favor? Carried. So we're back in open session as Corporate Services Committee. We do need to pass a motion recommending the recommendation from the tribunal to council. So we'll look for a mover for that. Deputy Mayor Hubert, Councillor Zafman. Let's wait for that to come up on the screen. Okay, the recommendation is there. Just make sure that it's exactly the way you expect it to be. The vote's open.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Next up, we have item 3.2, which is not to be heard before 1 o'clock, and we certainly accomplished that. Thank you for waiting, Mr. Colvin and the other representative from the OFA. Please come up to the microphone. I know we advised you they have roughly 5 minutes, considering the amount of time you spend in the gallery. Maybe give you a little bit of leeway on that, and then we'll have questions about the presentation about producing prosperity in Ontario. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a former councillor myself for 16 years, I fully recognize what you're going through. I appreciate the time that you've given me today. My name is Crispin Colvin, and I'm a director with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. The Ontario Federation of Agriculture is better known as the OFA, and we advocate on behalf of 37,000 farm families. Our farm businesses need the support of a vibrant community to be sustainable. Ontario is currently growing. The numbers show that the economy is moving ahead at a brisk rate, but growth is unbalanced. OFA is proposing a policy of distributed economic development, so all of Ontario can benefit from this potential. We see serious challenges in our urban centres caused by unbalanced growth. We need to plan to distribute this growth into affordable communities across the province of Ontario. There are numerous challenges facing our communities, such as infrastructure, high-speed internet, and labor shortages, to name a few. Our plan is to rebalance the growth in Ontario through distributed investments in infrastructure by supporting initiatives such as natural gas, transportation, broadband, and schools. As well, the OFA is working with governments to provide sufficient funding through the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. A regional transportation plan, as proposed by Oxford County Council, would meet the challenges of both rural and urban Ontario. This proposal is both more effective and more cost-efficient than the current high-speed rail proposal. Public investment alone triggers tremendous growth in Ontario, and the resulting private investment kickstarts the economy. Imagine if rural Ontario had access to natural gas for heating. The energy savings alone would make $1 billion per year in new disposable income available throughout Ontario. Imagine the additional new investment that will cause and what it will attract. The new natural gas lines in Grey Bruce area are expected to generate numerous jobs and boost the area's economic development. That is producing prosperity in Ontario, and it is one of the initiatives that the OFA has been working on for several years. Public investment in infrastructure pays dividends. You know the importance of dependable roads and bridges. These are essential for getting agricultural goods from farm to processors and from processors to markets worldwide. And the City of London is home to quite a few of the agribusinesses that sell products internationally. We propose creating opportunities to live and work in affordable communities across Ontario. This will create opportunity to build our local economies and increase the vibrancy of both rural and urban Ontario. Our agribusinesses depend on the support of our communities. With strong communities, we'll be better able to ensure access to safe, local food produced in an environmentally sustainable way. We want to protect our ecosystems and feed Ontarians. Industrial and residential growth must respect strict land use rules, so we don't devour our land, our agricultural land, which, according to Census Canada, is being lost at a rate of 350 acres a day. Farmers want to produce abundant, safe, reliable food in an environmentally sustainable manner. Our call for distributed economic development will produce prosperity across Ontario while addressing our rural and urban challenges. We have the support of the Eastern and Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, as well as the Ontario Chambers of Commerce. And councils across Ontario are supporting this initiative. I would encourage you, as influential civic leaders, to speak with your MPPs to promote distributed economic development and support producing prosperity in Ontario. So for those of you who remember the old Red-Green show, keep your stick on the ice. We're all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I look to committee for any questions for Mr. Colvin. Councillor Zaveman.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Colvin, for the presentation. I think, one thing which has been at the forefront of my mind since beginning of this term is working well with our regional neighbors, and having you here today with this presentation, I think outlines a number of the issues that we could certainly be building upon, which is great to see. I know one of them, just speaking around the issue of internet, we recently supported the SWIFT fund, which was great to see from the London perspective, as it's going to have benefits here, but as well as the region around us. I guess my main question is, when we're talking about the, or your idea of the distributive growth, is there a formula, or how is it looked at exactly that you would be proposing something like this that we would help lobby our MPPs on?
Well, the issue comes down to, it's perhaps more a large urban issue and probably more a Toronto issue. The cost of housing, the cost of industries locating, the cost of people getting from one point to another. And this is where the transportation aspect of it comes in. If we only invest in large areas, the rest suffers. Agriculture in today's world is a highly technical business. We need people who are well-educated and well-informed and able to get to places of work. We don't have that right now. We have a labor shortage, as many communities do. But we have relatively inexpensive housing when you compare it to Toronto and even London in many cases. But if people can get from A to B, if they can live in London if they so choose, but work in St. Mary's, if they want to live in St. Mary's and work in London, that they have an option to get there and to be able to do that. That is where we see the distribution of the economic development. It's a distribution of jobs, of housing, and of people.
Other questions for Mr. Colvin? Councilor Van Holst?
Thank you very much. Years ago, I used to work for Farm Business Consultants, and I probably visited 500 of those 37,000 farm businesses all over Ontario. So I'm familiar with some of their challenges, although some of them are new. So we're looking for more investment along those ways. Just a question about of course, the broadband. Have we looked at, I guess, the expenses that you're talking about, running the fiber to the various communities and natural gas? It's a pretty expensive proposition. Have we looked at running fiber along the Hydro One's corridors and lines? Is there an opportunity to work with them above ground as opposed to laying something in the ground?
That's probably $1 million question right there. That would really be determined by the community, by Bell, Rogers, Execulink, companies like that who want to find out that there's enough business to make it worthwhile. I get regular, and I live in Thorndale, but just outside of Thorndale, and I get regular emails from Bell and other companies offering fiber optics non-existent and no plans when I call them to have it extended. Certainly we're pushing for better internet service that way, and I was delighted when the City of London did join the SWIFT network. That was a great thing to do. In terms of natural gas, you need a province that's got the willingness to make it happen. Alberta is virtually 100% covered by natural gas, whether it's rural Alberta or the downtown Calgary. Saskatchewan is approximately 80% covered with a goal to going 100%. Manitoba currently sits around, I believe it's 45 to 50%, and their goal is 100%. Ontario is one of the few provinces that doesn't seem interested in supporting natural gas throughout the province. That's the kind of development that would help your community, our community. It would help everybody. So, but again, it takes a province willing to do it. Same with the fiber optics. It takes companies that are willing to say, we want to do that. Years and years ago, when Bell Canada first got the rights to telephone service across the country, one of the mandates that the government put in at the time, the federal government, was you have to service Canada, not just Toronto, Montreal, Windsor, Winnipeg, and so on. That meant they had to go to the north. They had to go to the far east and the far west and places that were relatively inaccessible. That's the kind of courage we need today, but that's the kind of thing that governments such as London can bring pressure on provincial and federal governments to make happen.
Okay, thank you. Regarding natural gas for heating, I'm happy to share with you a newer technology that is much more promising than the idea of natural gas. However, I'm going to ask about an issue we have here in London. The idea of a food terminal has become a popular thought in this area because our farmers, our local farmers, send their food to Toronto, and then it waits there for a while, and then it's sent back to here for our to our grocery stores. So many people, and certainly our Food Policy Council, is thinking that a food terminal in London where local food could come in here and then be just pushed back out to the region. So regional food. So essentially a southwestern Ontario food terminal in and around London would be valuable. And perhaps I could ask if something like that falls in to your bailiwick or even within this particular program.
Well, certainly anything that's going to enhance not just production, but distribution is positive. It's positive for agriculture and it's positive for your community as well. So yes, having a food terminal in London makes, to my way of thinking, and perhaps I'm prejudiced because I live close enough to the city, makes a ton of sense. You're servicing Windsor, you're servicing Chatham, you're servicing up to Owen Sound and beyond. Why should it all go to Toronto and come back out? And that's part of producing prosperity. That is part of what we're talking about, is let's have things spread out throughout Ontario. It doesn't have to be in one location, and that's precisely what we're talking about.
Thank you. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you for the presentation. So I won't echo the comments my colleagues have made so far, but I want to talk about strategy moving forward. I certainly support some of the concepts that you're articulating today. And I know that you've mentioned what other provinces have done and that London can have a strong voice, but I can tell you that London is just one of many municipal voices, as you know. And so the strategy of trying to move forward as a province is very important. And so I know and I hope that the Ontario Federation of Agriculture is working through other bodies and not just municipalities independently, like the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, where it may be federal in nature, and having the municipal partners in those rural municipalities who may see some of the benefits that you're talking about, I know cities do too, push that as the agenda. And of course, we need to be kept informed when we go through those portions of our lobbying, whether it's meetings with MPs or MPPs and our own interactions with our partners like FCM and AMO, or even pre-budget submissions that other levels of government put out and inquire on, for us to get detailed information, and for our staff, and I know Ms. Wilcox is in the audience kind of listening along, for us to get the information that the organization is putting out in a detailed way around the key times that may be valuable to us when we're developing our priorities to engage with our provincial and federal partners on, I think is very important for us to make those key decisions about what to include and what not, when we have obviously a whole range of items to include in those discussions. And it may be strategic for us to include a number of them, but not others. So I see the flow of information very important in this. I appreciate the presentation, but I think it's just a first step in ensuring that a municipality like London has the information that is being put out and is aware of the coordinated efforts that you're trying to achieve across the province on some of these issues. So I think there's probably a follow-up discussion with our staff that would be appropriate on how that would best work. And I would certainly be welcome to receive information on a regular basis, even as an individual councillor, about some of the issues that you're talking about and trying to coordinate.
Thank you. Certainly, information can be shared quite readily, and I can ensure that that happens and comes to the city. In terms of AMO, Good Roads, and Roma, Keith Curry, the president of the OFA, I believe is making a presentation at AMO this year in August. We do have councillors who are also OFA directors. I'm sure you know Mark Wales is one of them. So we try and keep those lines of communication open.
I don't see any other questions from committee, so I did have one. Sometimes when we talk about transportation infrastructure, I think the focus can kind of tunnel down into the movement of people. Obviously, the movement of goods is important for not just the City of London, but for the region. Actually getting goods to market and making sure that the highway systems in particular can handle the kind of shipments that we need to do by truck. When you're looking into the future from the OFA perspective, where do you see the highway system going and its ability to accommodate the kind of movement of goods that we need to see, not just 10 years from now, but 20 years from now?
I think the highway system will probably expand, but where we've let things slide, and this is more of a federal issue than it is a provincial issue, is some of the smaller short-run railways. The Goderich-Exeter line, for example, that runs through and down into London, that's overseen by the federal government. They have abrogated their responsibility in some ways by not funding those lines. That moves a lot of goods. It could also move people if it were put to more practical use. In terms of highway and transportation, certainly if London, for example, were a food hub, then yes, it would make sense to have better routes, better roads to come here. Exeter Produce ships a ton of stuff and trucks it all over the province, mostly to the Toronto Food Terminal. Would certainly benefit them if they only had to drive to London. So I see that expanding. I think you're quite correct in looking at that and saying, what do we do? I think the road system will expand, but I think we need to expand our rail system to move goods and people.
Thank you, and just to my colleagues and to Mr. Colvin, you know, I looked at some of the forecasts for what is expected along the 401 corridor, for example, between the GTA and Windsor. And for any of us who've driven on the 401, I had the misfortune of having to drive to Ottawa, just outside of Ottawa, for a family reunion on a farm out there, and it took a really long time to get there because it was just gridlock all the way. So between here and Toronto, it took about 4 hours. We drove near Port Dover on Friday the 13th, so I'm not sure that was a smart move on our part, but the rest of the way wasn't too bad. And we eventually had to get onto the 407 just to bypass the congestion. I'm waiting for the bill for that. I'm sure it's gonna be expensive, but it was at capacity now, and the 401, the projections are talking about double the number of cars and other vehicles on the road. So even if you were to think of some expansion of the 401, which is expensive, I can't imagine what it would be like with twice as many vehicles trying to do the same kind of trips. I'm talking trucks that are moving goods, people who are trying to get to work. You know, the congestion is very intense, and that was in Friday afternoon. You know, that wasn't a really peak period of time, and it was absolutely jammed. So, you know, I think we have to work together. One thing I'll say to Mr. Colvin is I was reading the slide about investing in infrastructure and the benefits from the economic perspective, and certainly that's very true. It was reminding me of our bus rapid transit project here in the City of London. Different communities need different kinds of infrastructure, and I think we have to support each other when we're advocating for infrastructure investment, because you know, gas is maybe what is needed in rural Ontario. They need to get connected into gas. I get the economic value proposition for that. Similarly, being able to move people around in the city affordably is what we need in a mid-sized city like London. And the economic impacts of that spending are quite significant. I don't have to remind everybody, we're talking about almost 4,400 person years of employment from building rapid transit. That's a huge number of jobs. That's basically 440 jobs for 10 years. That's a lot of work, and it's good paying work in construction industry, and it employs people essentially in the heavy construction industry in London. A lot of them are operating at places like Oldcastle and Dorchester, and you know, it's not just businesses in London. That is economic benefit that is shared on a regional basis. So I think we have to support each other when we're advocating for infrastructure investments, because it does have those big, broad economic impacts in the short term and in the long term. And I wanted to thank you for coming here today to share your perspective from the OFA. It was a really good presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, councillors, for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a motion to receive the presentation. Councillor Zafman, Deputy Mayor Hubert. All those in favor? We're going to do it on the screen. Yeah, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to item 4.1, this confirmation of appointment to the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. The candidate is Tara McDaniel. Do I have a mover for that? Deputy Mayor Hubert, second Councillor Zafman. Any discussion?
I had the opportunity to meet her yesterday. She's great, so I think she'll be a good addition.
Wonderful timing. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
That brings us to item number 4.2, which is communication from Councillor Van Holst related to daytime meetings. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I sent this off and was a little surprised that we weren't having the PPM. It was a month since we had asked for that, so I expected that. I was saying in here that I was asking staff for some information. This isn't a request for the information, it's mine for the asking, but just it seemed it might be relevant to the citizens before they started giving their comments. I think sometimes we have a public participation meeting, and then new information comes out after the debate, and I just wanted to avoid that situation. But it looks like we'll have to have this sometime in the future, so maybe I can, through you, to our staff, ask when that is anticipated. How soon can we have a public participation meeting on this issue? Because, of course, it would have been nice to clear this up before the end of the application period.
Saunders.
Through Mr. Chair, first of all, it would not have been possible for us to have scheduled the public meeting for today. To put the ad in the paper, the deadline for the ad to be submitted was before council made a decision on this matter, so it would not have been possible to have that meeting today. As well, we were required and requested by council to undertake some public engagement, which included some information on our website and to reach out to community organizations, which, as you all know, can be difficult during the summer months. So as a result, we were proposing to undertake that engagement throughout August into early September and bring it forward to a public meeting in September. However, we're prepared to bring it forward in August. However, the amount of public engagement we'll be able to undertake in that in turn will be limited.
Okay, thank you. Is it possible to simply have the public participation meeting and then wait for the public engagement to complete before having our debate at council? I think that was something that was bandied about at a previous committee this week.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as I understand, what you're suggesting is that we have the public meeting in August and then bring a report later on the public engagement that was undertaken. I'm sorry if I misunderstood.
I think you've understood perfectly. That's what my question is, yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can certainly do that. That would continue to result in a report to the September 11th CSC, but we can certainly do it in that order if you wish.
Okay, thanks. So that's another possibility that maybe I'd look to my colleagues to perhaps comment on.
Well, I see Deputy Mayor Hubert has some comments. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, the councillor really is trying to, in a backdoor way, and has been trying to restructure the.
Deputy Mayor Hubert?
Yes.
Let's avoid comments like backdoor way, please.
Sorry, okay, through alternative means to restructure the way government is conducted at the city. And we have had, and even in the last couple of years as we've tried to have PPMs on things like ranked ballots and ward boundaries and those sorts of things, very little participation.
Maybe I'll just make a point of privilege.
Well,
Councillor Van Holst, go ahead, point of privilege.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. So, I appreciate that my colleague not make comments on what I'm trying to do. I may be just trying to save us a whole bunch of money, which is why I had the first part of this request in here, just on finding out how much of a liability the recognized management overtime is. So, my motives may be my own and may be much broader than what the councillor or the deputy mayor is suggesting. So, what I would hope is maybe a comment on the best path forward for this particular motion, which was approved by council, that we do have these meetings.
Well, there's no, I'm not in any way denigrating what the councillor, I just disagree with it. And in paragraph 2 of his letter, he talks about moving to a daytime schedule, which has various impacts in terms of how we operate and how we've operated government. I think that's a fair statement. So here's the deal, and to what I was attempting to say is that we have had PPMs at this committee on many occasions, and sometimes we've done sort of, no one showed up, so let's do it again. And when we have a PPM on a substantive issue in a vacuum, we tend to get very little engagement and response. And so the public needs to have something to respond to. And I think what the clerk is suggesting is that they're going to do exactly what council asked them to do, which is, and it's going to be challenging even at that, because they're going to be trying to engage the public in the midst of a municipal election campaign. So to have a PPM in August without having the engagement before that is asking people to respond to something somewhat in both a difficult time of the year, but also without a whole lot of engagement about what they're responding to. So I just don't think it's quite frankly prudent. And I think it should wait until the process rolls forward that the clerk is going to be undertaking.
At this point, I think it might be helpful to see if there's any kind of seconder for the idea that Councillor Van Holst suggested. There's obviously different ways that this could proceed. He was suggesting we have the PPM in August and target the September meeting. So if that's what you're suggesting, I think it's probably worth finding if there's a seconder.
Yeah, if I may, I was actually just presenting that as an option and looking for the comments from my colleagues. And I think Deputy Mayor makes some great points. And at this point, it doesn't really matter since we've sort of missed that point of opportunity. So I think if he's suggesting we go with the staff's suggestion that we have it in September, I would agree. And I think that's a good idea. Thank you.
Okay, can we have a motion to receive the communication from Councillor Van Holst? Councillor Zaveman? Seconder? Councillor Morgan. Councillor Zaveman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just specifically on what Councillor Van Holst has submitted, just out of curiosity, if we can deal with this somewhat now, would something like recognized management overtime and the value of that, would that be even able to be discussed in a public session of council?
Through the chair, this is an interesting issue because RMO is not necessarily tied to specific issues. It's not necessarily tied just to council meetings. Not everybody receives RMO, some have flex time. So the principles of it you can discuss in public, and I'm just doing that now. If you want to get into details of who got RMO, that would be a different matter, and I would suggest you go on camera. If we want to go talk global amounts, that's fine, but you can't tie it necessarily to one issue, which I believe is where the councillor was going on this. So.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Brings us to the end of the items for direction. I'm just looking to see if there's any deferred matters or additional business. Of course, we do have a couple of closed session items to deal with. Seeing none, can I have a motion to go into closed session? There are two items on the agenda. One is related to solicitor-client privilege advice litigation, potential litigation. The second is about personal matters, identifiable individual litigation, potential litigation, and solicitor-client privilege advice. A motion to go into closed session. Councillor Zaveman, Councillor Van Holst. Let's have that up on the screen.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, we'll be heading into committee room number 3. I expect since there's no additional matters or additional business, we'll be adjourning from the committee room.